Hi all, thank you for giving up 24 degrees of pure bliss to stay indoors with us this evening. I know I promise we'll try and finish before England bring it home later this evening, and I'll be swift in our discussions. I'm Amandeep Kalra, and I'm the co-chair of the Young Trustees and an associate architect at Be First. And co-hosting with me tonight is fellow Young Trustee David Eagleton. We will be recording this talk as always, and it will go up on our YouTube channels for everybody else that couldn't make it and had to stay outside in the sun to make the most of that. So today we're continuing our Life Not Quite Outside Architecture series, which explores disciplines outside traditional architectural practice. So if you're looking for a fresh perspective because you're stuck in an architecture vacuum and lockdown has really got you thinking, then you are in the right place, my friends. So over the last few months, we have already hosted some incredible talks from a collection of divergent voices covering disciplines such as public sector, public art, and academia. And we will also be looking at curation, journalism, and climate, and a few others over the next few months, where all of the speakers have one thing in common, and that's that they started studying architecture. So how many people study architecture but don't plan on becoming an architect? Not that many. And how many people become architects and don't practice as architects? Also not that many. And how many times have you heard or said the sort of saying, so and so joined the dark side, probably because they wanted to earn some more money? So what is this dark side, and why are we as architects like afraid of money? And the old saying of I do architecture for the passion, it's never about the money. That's all fine and dandy if your family has a few estates, a trust fund, and a juicy inheritance lined up. For the many of us who can't rely on the bank of mum and dad, their voices are suppressed by the weight of passion. And this careless attitude about money, whether it's lower fees, minimum salaries to staff, or just not understanding costs within a project and blaming clients for the problems on projects, is the mantra for quite a lot of practices. So why do we as architects create this societal pressure that doing anything but architecture when you're an architect or studying architecture is a cop-out? I'm not saying that all developers are great, just like I'm not saying that all architects are bad, because I'm also one myself, and many people on this call are architects as well. But many architects do feel frustrated by the key decisions made well outside of their control that have some of the biggest impacts on their projects. And some take the leap to join this so-called dark side. And we have some interesting people here today. So developers come in many shapes and forms. So you've got companies on FTSE 100 companies such as Barratt Homes, Berkeley, or British Land, Taylor Wimpey. You have housing associations such as Peabody and many others. You have insurance companies like Legal & General, and you have local authorities themselves who have always been developers effectively, but are sort of ramping up more and more so recently. And you also have amongst that small scale startups with just one or two people looking for infill opportunities in specific locations that they're familiar with. So tonight we're going to hear from some of them and their incredible journey into the world of development. And I cannot contain my excitement for this incredible panel tonight. So please note that I've heavily edited the incredible list of achievements our panel have done in their bios so that we can finish on time. But first off, we have Remi Connolly-Taylor, who's an East London-based designer and developer, founded REMI.C.T Studios in 2017, and also co-founded the property development firm Kit London. So Remy, give us your story. How did you get here?
Thank you for that introduction. Right, so my story started with, basically, I was freelancing at the time. I was based in New York. I'm an East Londoner at heart or origin. And I decided to come back to East London and decided that I needed somewhere to work and live. But I realized that there was nowhere that I could afford back home, close to family and friends. So I actually decided to take myself to auction and take a bit of a risk and buy a plot of land, which was 8.5 by 9 in Maryland in Stratford. That had failed planning, I think, about 3 times since about 2002. and I probably didn't really know the risk I was getting into at the time at all. It had a series of legal issues, it had a series of constraints due to the fact that it's next to two terraced homes, but due to the cost of these risk complexities, I decided to jump and bought that plot of land, and that was kind of the kickoff for the studio. So the house was all about bringing a different form of lifestyle, or it was explaining a different form of lifestyle throughout the planning process, in regards to the fact of, you know, most people in London, if you can afford a home, you need a good working space at home, which has been very present within these times in the last 2 years. And so the idea was about creating a different hierarchy to the home. It wasn't able to have a traditional terrace, you know, rear garden, but it was the idea of bringing gardens on each floor. And the first thing we started with was working with some amazing light surveyors and actually digging. So we ended up doing a very large dig of 4 meters, and we did a large basement, ground floor, first floor, with the hierarchy kind of changing within the house, with the whole top floor being studio space. Now, from that, it kind of started to trigger the question of diversity within the housing market, of what is actually being brought forward as products. And with the beginning of the studio, it was an ongoing conversation that, you know, London, it's such an amazing laboratory of diversity of lifestyles in all shapes and forms. You know, are our homes reflecting this? And as the studio started growing with projects with clients, we decided to go and get ourselves another development, which is Birkbeck House, which is 6 by 11, which was an even bigger risk that I didn't realize at the time, that was deemed car parking spaces, which we were able to get across the line as a 3-bedroom home. And that was, again, talking about lifestyle, about not just, you know, square meterage, but also volume, light, quality of the garden. It's not having to be maybe the same footprint as the neighboring terrace, and so on and so forth. And we got very excited about this conversation of lifestyle. And about 2 years ago, with my business partner, Sarah Nisrala, we opened up Kit London, which is a property development firm that kind of focuses on infill sites around East London. And basically, we take the scraps that are not usually the beautiful, gorgeous, you know, footprint, or aligned maybe with the terrace, but because of their complexities and because of their constraints, may it be legal, or in regards to maybe how we, you know, work with the streetscape and it not maybe following the traditional pattern, we take that risk very early on, and we problem solve it through design, and also providing different forms of lifestyles within the home. There's all different makeups of families within this amazing city, and the idea is for us to, you know, focus on that market of people, and maybe not, you know, the first time buyers or the family with 2 children or the rest of it. It's all different forms of lifestyles. What has always been very exciting is the fact that obviously we lead with design and, you know, innovation, and it's really exciting that we get to, you know, collaborate very early on with engineers and so on to make sure that these sites, due to their constraints, you know, means that we're able to, at the moment, test a lot of prefab technology. Or it's very important for us, like I said, I'm from East London, I'm born and bred. I want to make sure that all the homes are sustainable. So it's not just about us creating, you know, using the sustainable materials, but also the methodology of how they're made because of the constraints, and trying to keep our neighbours happy when we're in construction, but also about the lifestyle and the well-being within our homes. So that's now, it's a bit of a collaboration between the studio, that now the studio focuses on architectural design, and Kit is the property development company. But obviously, you know, they're brother and sister, and they play nice with each other. There is sometimes very interesting conversations in the office, I'm not going to lie, but it does create an interesting dialogue of what does it mean, and have a discussion, you know, within the studio of what it means to talk about the user right at the beginning, when we're even looking at, you know, a site or a potential site. So, yeah.
Thanks, Remy. I love that you took this leap at that moment, and it triggered a series of like questions and thoughts for you. Like, I bet a lot of architects over their life have always thought about, oh, I'd just love to design my own home, and a lot of people have managed to do so, but very few have probably picked up the scraps as you described it and gone, right, what can I do with this that means that I can stay where I want to stay, close to where I grew up or where my connections are. And actually, it didn't just end as like, that was it was done, it's mine, but it just sparked lots of questions for you, then actually answered one, but created lots more questions.
Yes, continuously lots of questions.
Yeah. No, that's great. So next up we have Guy Rochez. Guy is a senior development manager at Brick by Brick, and where he manages a team and provides direction to a portfolio of design-led and sustainable housing developments. So Guy, give us your story.
Hi, thanks Deep for that intro. So yeah, as Deep said, I'm senior development manager at Brick by Brick, and we're a local authority development company based down in Croydon. I guess how I got to that point is probably from a very early stage after part one that I sort of took a series of side steps. And after part one, I ended up out in Thailand working on a big hotel development where I was in a design and construction management role. And I didn't really realize at the time, but a lot of the stuff that I was doing was more what a DM would do, or what I do now, basically. And so, but I still decided after that, I really enjoyed it, but I decided to go back and do my part two, and where I then did lots of kind of planning related stuff during my part two, and that then got me really interested in planning, and I guess kind of engaged with kind of how local authorities worked. And then subsequent to part two, I ended up working with a few friends in a small practice called Party that they had set up, where again, we got a commission for a small compared to the last hotel development, but still quite big hotel development out in South Australia. And we, again, there was no project or development manager. And so as part of our scope, we ended up sort of picking up those bits of work, which is kind of really interesting being out in South Australia, suddenly trying to work out how you deliver a project through planning. And this site was about 50 acres on a protected bit of land, I think 3 nationally listed species. It was also on an island, so all the construction methodology had to be off-site, and there were protected whales in this bay that this ship would have to come into, and they were all kind of crazy environmental national sign-offs that we had to get through planning, and I essentially managed that through planning, and we got planning, which is kind of amazing, given that, I guess, similar to Remy, we didn't really understand what like getting planning was, or we did understand it in theory, but actually the reality of how you get all the various approvals that then feed into a big planning application, how complex and challenging that can be. And so I guess after that then really triggered my, I guess, or further triggered my interest in planning. And I then got a job in Croydon in the local planning authority there, in their placemaking team, which is kind of a mixture of urban design and planning policy, but also providing kind of design advice to case officers when they're determining applications. And through that, I then worked on the Croydon Suburban Design Guide, which is a bit of planning guidance that got adopted a couple of years ago. And that then also really got me interested in small scale development. And we worked quite closely with Brick by Brick because they're owned by Croydon. So they're kind of almost like a sister team. And then so it kind of, once the Suburban Design Guide was finished, it felt like quite a natural progression to then take another side step and start working at Brick by Brick. So that's kind of what happened there, which was great. And I guess I should also say, while I was doing all that, I was also decided I'd get my part 3, even though it became increasingly apparent that actually I probably was never going to use it at this point. But I was sort of, I was going to, I guess fall on my sword and get to the end. And so I did that, and I do think that was really useful, because actually so much of what I do now in terms of all the contractual stuff is what you learn at part 3 that you don't learn really at part 1 or part 2 is super useful. And so then now in my role at Brick by Brick, as we're very design led, which is great, because there's kind of lots of conversations about design and sustainability. I think if I was working for a more corporate developer, I would probably struggle with that kind of maybe wouldn't exist. And I think that's probably really important as an aspect coming from the architectural background. But I guess there's also the thing about we're in this constant push and pull of trying to make schemes viable, but also not skimp on the design. And there's this kind of constant dialogue. And I think being very open with the architects, which is really interesting. And so, yeah, I guess my sort of journey to where I am now is kind of a series of side steps.
Thanks, Guy. I think also there's lots of little side steps as well with you. It's not sort of like one big and you're kind of that. I think you're constantly seeing and assessing where you're at, and you're seeing like that looks cool, like a child in a candy store, but it's like, you know, this maybe more fits closely with, because, you know, I think this linear route of what an architectural education does is takes you to somewhere and you kind of get there and then just grow in that same way. Whereas I think in this kind of more almost sporadic nature, you kind of get somewhere, you like something else, and you kind of always chisel and carve your role. I think that suburban design guide that you worked on, you know, since then loads of local authorities have been doing something similar across, like, so I think it was a champion in its heyday of, and now there's lots of local authorities bringing out suburban design guides for small sites and how to make the most of them, especially with the local London plan as well. So
yeah, that was super exciting to work on. I think also we knew at the time that lots of other boroughs were kind of going to be doing it, and then I know part of that we end up having lots of discussions with them as they then started after the Croydon one was adopted. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, incredible to be working with. So thanks. And next we have Yemi Alladron, who is an architect and major projects manager for Housing Association. And she served as an elected National Council member for the RABA and also sits on its Education Committee. So Yemi, give us your story. I was kind of hoping we could have had Obama in the audience tonight, but couldn't pull rank there.
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. Good evening, all. Thank you, Deep and all the trustees for tonight. I think it's a really interesting topic, and yeah, it's great to see that actually there are quite a few of us that have sidestepped. So it's brilliant. I do often get asked if I'm coming back, but I say I never left. So so that's interesting. So yeah, so I am an architect by profession, currently working as a major projects manager. Funnily enough, this side of the fence, I do more or less exactly the same thing as Guy does, but we have all these different names for them, but we're more or less doing the same thing. So focusing on the delivery of affordable housing projects in North and East London. I work in the third sector, so slightly different to Guy. So it's a non-for-profit sector for housing association. And there is a distinction between housing associations and local authorities. Prior to that, I worked in private practice, mainly on luxury one-off houses. And many of these were in kind of sensitive locations and were listed buildings or in conservation areas. And a couple of small-scale housing projects with splatterings of medical and commercial projects. But I did start my architectural working life or designing housing projects for local authorities and the like. So my absolute passion is housing, now specifically social affordable housing. As a designer, I guess I've always really enjoyed the small scale or the medium scale and interventions, and I quite like resolving things in detail. I probably can't quite put my finger on why housing and where the passion comes from rather than commercial spaces or more civic buildings, but it's what I always gravitated to even as a student. But now working on larger scale housing projects, it is something that I still very much find interesting, but yeah, there is a difference there when it comes to resolving things, you know, really, you know, the door handle detail, the joinery detail, it's a different thing. So I'm quite jealous of what Remy does actually, what she's able to do. So in terms of what inspired me to go into development, it got to a point where architecture for me, I guess, became more about more than just designing a building or delivering a building. And I had been appointed onto as a council member for the Royal Institute of British Architects, and I guess I became more aware of wider issues in the construction industry and at the profession at larger scale. So safety, sustainability, affordability. I was really frustrated by the fact that actually the reality is that architects as consultants don't have as much sway in the decision-making process as I think we should. Maybe I would say that, but I was astonished by some of the lack of design quality and build quality of affordable housing projects that were popping up all over the place. And it dawned on me that architects were spending a lot of time talking to each other and to the already converted, and about the way things were, and I had enough of simply talking. I am a talker, but very much a doer. So it became clear for me personally that in order to be the change I wanted to see, I personally had to find a way of preaching to those that needed the convincing. So the thought was that actually who does have the power to bring about those changes, and it was clear that it was the commissioners of projects, those who have the money, the clients. So for me the goal was to become the client. In my current role I wear multiple hats, but as a project manager I work with my colleagues and other stakeholders to meet supply targets and develop high quality, genuine, and I kind of emphasize on genuining affordable housing, ensuring kind of long-term sustainability, kind of social, economic and environmental of all the projects. And the thing maybe I'll focus on here as well is appraising the financial viability of schemes, and producing long-term cash flows is central to my work. And this sounds absolutely boring and really, really dry. And if anyone had told me that I would be interested at all, or find this kind of thing really interesting, numbers, I would have told them it was a lie. But I think I do find it super interesting because it involved me learning a different skill and using part of my brain that I probably hadn't used since GCSE maths. And B, I think as architects, we are inherently problem solvers, and kind of the financial appraisal is a way of solving a problem through figures and numbers. And it's a challenge, and I love a challenge. And it's, you've got your end building or your end goal in mind. How do you get that to work through numbers and meeting your objectives? So for me, I find that super interesting. But some of the other things involved kind of reviewing and developing the association's design guidance and employees' requirements, and managing our quality control inspectors on site, researching and reviewing innovative approaches to construction, procurement, and really doing some reviewing kind of detailed working drawings and design, which is kind of 80% of what I was doing as an associate in private practice before I left. So actually I would say that I am still doing about 80% of what I was doing as an architect now.
Thanks, Yemi. It's quite different in the sense that I think you probably spent, got to quite a senior position as an architect, really, and had all that weight of spending time being an architect and really consciously thinking, right, actually, I'm really passionate about social housing, and not maybe the luxury one-offs that you had probably been spending painstakingly time on your most recent job, but then also thinking about how you could put that passion to a really meaningful cause and be a doer that you said you'd want to be. So I think the weight of actually having built up all that experience as an architect to then step outside and know that probably not as easy to then go back if you wanted to. And I think the question comes back to how you just ended it. Actually, you never stopped being an architect, and I think that's a really, really valid point, that actually a lot of what you do is your job is all the skills and things that we as architects learn as part of our education and practice. It's just doing it in a slightly different way for a client side, really. So absolutely. Really good to hear that. And last but 100% not least, we have Avital Wittenberg. Avital is also an architect with design experience spanning roles within public realm, mixed-use housing and community engagement programs. And she currently works at Makeshift as head of architecture and design. So Avital, no pressure on the three speakers that have gone before. The stage is yours.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to talk as part of the panel. So yeah, my name's Avital. I'm an architect. I currently work as head of architecture and design at Makeshift, where we design, develop, manage and operate meanwhile cultural destinations across London. So a bit about my journey. I guess I've always been very creative. I've always had a genuine interest in people, culture, and engaging in communities. So I decided to study architecture because I liked art, and probably like many students, you don't really know what to do when you like art, and architecture seems like a good profession. So I chose to do architecture. And at uni, I always enjoyed the conceptual and contextual understanding of a project, and understanding the relationship between people and place. And then I remember doing work experience on my summer holiday at a traditional architecture practice, and not really enjoying being behind a desk and designing often quite uninspiring projects. But I still continued, continued at university because I thought I should, and didn't know what other options I had. And that's why this is so great. And I wish I had this when I was studying to, teach me about what other options I have. So after my part two, I knew I didn't really want to work for traditional architecture practice. So I interned at Open City as part of the education team. And after a few months, I got a job there where I was coordinating and running public engagement programs with the aim of creating awareness of architecture in the built environment through hands-on workshops and building visits. And I really enjoyed it. I loved engaging with students, engaging with adults in the community, and seeing what ideas the general public had. But then I also missed designing. So I decided, like a lot of people when they feel a bit lost, to go traveling. So I went traveling to South America. I spent almost a year there, but whilst I was there, I volunteered with a couple of charitable organisations to design and build projects for local communities. And I loved being part of the design and build process. I loved working together with the local communities themselves and learning about their culture. And then after I came back to London, I felt the pressure again, going back to work. And so I just went back into traditional architecture. But again, had the itch of doing something more fulfilling. So on my annual leave, I went to Cambodia and helped with a charity over there to design and build a community shelter for a local community. And continued studying architecture, and again felt the pressure to finish my part three, because you've done your part one, you've done your part two, you might as well get your part three. So got that done. And then I felt the need to move on to something more fulfilling. So I worked for a company which focused heavily on community engagement and was designing master plans and for the public realm. So that was really interesting. And then after that, I discovered Makeshift, where I am now. So I never had the intention of working for a developer, but I think what drew me to Makeshift was that their values really aligned with mine. So Makeshift are developers with a social conscience. And what I love about Makeshift is that social value is embedded in the project throughout its life cycle. So in the engagement process, in the design. So we work with a lot of local artists and makers, and we also manage and operate the site. So we look at onboarding local businesses. So yeah, it's been great so far. I started last year, and I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. I think the theme with yourself is kind of having moments where you feel a bit lost or not, not feeling like you fit in, and I think questioning that and actually doing something about it, as opposed to it is what it is. This is what I signed up for, and I've got to do the full hog and just continue. I mean, we all kind of ended up doing the hog, all of us anyway, and that still just tells us, even with the room full of people that are kind of challenging those norms, I think the kind of weight of finishing, I think, is something that's just there. But also that very last bit, we've all sort of said how important we've felt that's been, that very last bit in kind of unlocking all of those skills that are quite transferable across industry. Whereas, the first 5 years are all great, but probably don't be done in just 3, I reckon. But that's just me. So thanks everybody for your incredible introductions. We'll kick off with a few questions ourselves while the audience start warming up and getting a few questions in. So one from just me is, did you guys have any, I guess, preconceptions about working as a developer, and did that change when you started your role? So we all have conceptions, I think. So I think it's just good to know when you started the role how that might have changed. So if I start off with Yemi first on that one.
I smile because I was definitely told, you said it at the beginning, Amandeep, I was definitely told that I was going over to the dark side. I think there is a preconception that all kind of develop care about is their bottom line, money, and that many perhaps don't have a social conscience or care about design quality. Now that was a big one for me, because that's what I'm all about, social purpose and kind of high quality design. So to try and mitigate that risk of where I would end up and ending up in that kind of environment, which I would have absolutely hated. And I think Guy touched on it earlier as well. It was very important for me to be selective of where I chose to work, because the truth is, when I decided to transition, I wasn't sure how much truth there was in that preconception, and I really didn't understand all the different players in the game. So I chose very specifically to work in a housing association because their core purpose is to meet the objectives to develop housing through astute financial management. However, whilst also ensuring that they're not excluding the communities that is their mission to serve. So whilst I can't speak for private developers, in terms of housing associations, I think the preconceptions there have been managed to balance because of their core social purpose. So.
Extremely well and succinctly answered. Anybody else want to jump in, or I can pick on you? Avital, would you say Makeshift is a private developer, if I'm trying to sort of put it into a box, because it's not quite a public sector and it's not really a housing association? So
yeah, I think Makeshifts are very different to your traditional developer, I guess, and that's what pleasantly surprised me. Because, like Yemi was saying, they have quite bad reputation for building buildings for building's sake and not really thinking about the impact on the local community. And so, yeah, and the majority of developers are driven by profit. So delivering social value and understanding the needs of the community in which they're developing becomes less important. And it's just a tick box exercise. Whereas Makeshift, their main drive is to help local communities. Everyone has to make a profit, but that is their main drive, and they want to create places that feel honest and relevant to the local community.
I will touch on money in a sec, but that was really, really good points. Remy, I guess slightly different for you in the sense that you set up something from scratch. So you were in a position whereby you could, and also running an architectural practice, you could sort of, decide what the ethos of this development company is, that is kind of true to what your beliefs are, so you can create that from establishing the company, I guess.
Yes, I think there's already been a few points that have been touched on in regards to about the numbers. I think what happens with a lot of developments, they, you know, the bottom line is always, you know, is always what everybody talks about on the dark side. And I always think that the appraisal, it's about learning the rules so that you can break them. And, you know, for KIT, the reason why I started off by saying that, you know, it's important for us to find the right sites. Obviously, they usually, you know, the scraps that are left over, is that, you know, there is a risk with development. There's a risk in planning, there's a risk in construction, and there's a cost, and there's a lot of moving parts. And yes, they do need to be profitable, but for us to really drive design, it's very important for us to be very selective at the beginning. Can this site really hold our ethos all the way through about creating quality? And that means a lot of homework at the front, including even having down to the right investors who actually believe in design. There's so many parties, but it's making sure that every party has the same, you know, ethos and belief, and can really understand your vision from beginning to end. And that is something that we've learned from, you know, the contractors that we work with, from, you know, even when it, you know, talking with the planners and, you know, selling everyone the vision all the way along. But it is very important that the site makes sense right at the beginning and the numbers do work, because, you know, there is also the fact that we work with investors, we work, you know, also we need to pull a profit. You know, the reality is developers do, you know, feed like pythons, right? You eat every 3 years or so, and it's not like architecture where it's a nice salary each month. It's the fact that you're waiting 3 years, and I think that also needs to be, you know, recognized. So then obviously some people get slightly hungrier than others, and we're trying to bring that bottom line forward. And design does take time, and there is a lot of risk, but I think it is important to say that, you know, playing with the numbers is the way that we've, you know, mitigated it, and with the sites at the beginning.
That's why you still have an architecture practice, so that you have your you have your Python and you have your regular one at the same time. No, that was really, yeah, I think I agree with everybody there. We got some questions coming in. I might just do one and then we'll dive in, David. The one I had was on just about money. I think architects avoid this subject like the bubonic plague, basically, and in all forms. I think from the basics of discussing the salary in the office to when somebody starts talking about costs on a project, you're like, well, that's for the client to do. I'm just going to design my beautiful thing. Not all architects are like this. There are a lot more commercial savvy architects who understand the brief in a bit more detail, and larger practices have some of those expertise in-house. But maybe kicking off, Guy, how do you, because money is a fundamental part of all of your roles. Do you feel that your views on money has changed, and kind of the value of it since you've changed your roles?
Yeah, I mean, definitely my kind of previous perception of developers as kind of greedy and dark side was definitely existed, and then actually I think brick by brick, because of, I mean, similar to Remy and Yemi talking about challenging sites and trying to deliver kind of good quality design, that you have to be really open with the architects about what the appraisal is saying. And when we have our gateway sessions with the architect present, we're like, this is the shortfall, or this is the profit, and this is the target that we need to achieve, and being completely transparent. And I think that, I mean, I don't know how kind of, I guess, more a private developer, whether they would be so open, but I think by being that open, you in a way incentivize the architects, because they feel engaged with it. And I think maybe in a lot of development companies there probably isn't that dialogue, but I think it is a really productive one to have. I would say I do think there is then, I mean, I've experienced a few times where there have been architecture practices who are really stubborn about what they want to achieve, and I completely understand that as an architect myself, but then being like, well, it's kind of like we literally can't do that, and trying to have that conversation, and sort of, you know, you usually get there, but it's sometimes it's kind of finding that balance between protecting the design and also kind of finding the compromise where you have a scheme that is viable and can be delivered, I guess.
That's where there's two parts of you fighting each other, isn't it? When you're sort of an architect and you're going to have that uncomfortable conversation with being a client side, or actually if it's yourself and you are the architect for your own development company, and you're having that decision that you're making, Remy, about whether you take £10,000 more profit or do you plug that into choosing a better brick spec, and it's not as simple as that, right? Because it's that extra profit might be part of the next pipeline of your projects that's funding a newer project, and it's all of those cogs aligning. So the complexity of that is all unraveled when you're exposed to that world of costs and figures and viability appraisals, which you're completely blanked by. You might be every now and then given a cost per square meter by a client, or use this spec, or this is our internal spec, but I've never worked for an architectural practice where I've had that level of transparency that you just described, Guy, being sat down and told the appraisal is failing, we need 2 more units, or we need to reduce this spec, otherwise we can't build your scheme. Like that really, black and white, you can't really do anything about that. So yeah, no, that's been good. Anybody else wanted to jump in on that one at all?
I think probably just to say that definitely my concept, like Guy, changed, and one of the ways I think maybe architectural education curriculum could be improved is to better understand money, because it's not something we really learn about. And I think better understand money in relation to architectural businesses and setting up a business, if that's what you choose to do, but also in understanding how projects are financed. It really important. Money matters. And when we talk about social housing in relation to housing association projects, they are financed through government funding as well as private finance. And due to the relatively low grant rates of government funding, affordable housing is largely funded through profits that are made from open market sales, but then for a housing association ploughed back in to the organisation, therefore it's not for profit. So therefore there's an acute pressure on developments to be financially and commercially viable. If you're unable to sell, you're unable to build. And in order to sell, you need to kind of offer what the market wants and retain a competitive advantage. And delivering your projects on budget, to budget, is absolutely imperative. So unlike projects when I was working as an architect, delivering the luxury one-off homes, and it was the case that clients could often just find a little bit more money if they really wanted that extra bit of whatever, that bit of Carrara or whatever it was. In kind of the affordable housing sector, it just doesn't work like that, and you have to find ways, and sometimes quite tough decisions made on keeping a project to budget, either through alternative methods of construction or changing of materials or changing detailing. So money is very important, and we need to better understand how to get grips with it and look at it slightly differently as it being evil and bad. We need to understand it more.
Could not agree more, and I think it would help us all in all those ways, and in terms of better running businesses, better paying our staff, and actually better talking about those things that are most important to us. And actually, architects that have got a serious grip on this are seriously valued by clients. If you can sit in a meeting and an architect can say, actually, I can, make that building 20% more net to gross, more efficient, and we've got an amazing glazing system that has the equally slim profile and U value, and it's half the price. Like that, well, money is worth their weight in gold to a client, and it doesn't mean you're compromising quality. You're just thinking outside the box in order to deliver the quality of your own design. And that's the difference where you have to see it. It's not selling your soul to be a commercial architect. It's going, I really want my high quality design to be delivered. What can I proactively do for the client to make this happen, as opposed to I've done my bit, you sort the rest out. Right, David, we've got a few questions down. I think we'll skip the rest of ours, and then we'll hopefully get a few that kind of tie into some of the things we're asking anyway.
Yeah, I think we could talk all night with our own questions here. Guys sidestepping into part 3, Avital pressured into part 3. I kind of feel like there's a whole a whole discussion there in itself, but we should probably open up to some questions. So Niharika has some questions. I'm just going to ask you to unmute and then you can fire away. Hello, Yemi, can you hear me?
Yes, yep. I can. Sorry, I popped myself on mute.
Hello. I'm an architect by profession. I've been developing a keen interest in project management for the past year. I spoke to also a few people like project management developer side, and I've also been doing the Prince 2 course because somebody recommended me to make that switch from architecture to project management. I'm a very creative person, and sometimes I think you touched on it when you were speaking, like I worry like I'm going to lose that touch because as an architect you're involved in drawings and designing, and so much of your creative side gets used to. And project management, I feel I love management and I like managing and reports and everything, but sometimes I feel, is it like a lot of just reports, a lot of like boring stuff, you know, how some people like, do you lose that touch, yes, to the creative side, or just a bit more into your role, I guess? Yeah. I'm picking your brains on it, that one.
Yeah, no, I guess it's something that I constantly, even now, still worry about, but I'm absolutely loving what I'm doing now. I'm finding other ways. I'm quite lucky in the sense that in my role I am able to work very, very closely with architects, and they probably hate me as a client because I get more involved than others would typically get involved, but that's the architect in me. But I think the way I've also managed to work around that is doing other things that allow me to keep those creative juices going. So I might do some work now and again for some friends that might need some drawings done. I might do some private work and put in a planning application for somebody. I also am quite involved in design review panels. So there are other ways of getting the buzz that you might otherwise be missing in your day job if you're not able to get fulfilled that way. So I would say, yeah, there are other ways of making sure that you still get the creative buzz that you want. You can enter competitions, all sorts of things. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
I think it also seems, you know, there's a different type of creative buzz that you get, whether it's through the numbers or whether it's, you know, through trying to get something off the ground, which I think Remy you kind of touched on, you know, that kind of problem solving through design, and then how you might start to sell that to the planners to pick up on, you know, to get something, an unviable site, how you might start to think of creative ways to make it viable. I don't know, is that something that you guys would agree with?
I would definitely agree with that. I think I didn't, when I first started with the first development, I don't think I knew properly where development started and stopped. And I still feel like I don't know. I think even within the studio, I'm always all the time going, okay, designer hat on, designer hat off, developer hat on, developer hat off. And I'm like, it all feels very much, you know, like a lot of the same thing. Like designing the numbers is design, you know, looking at a site and appraising it and reviewing it and realizing the complexities in my mind, you know, feels like part of the design. Understanding the end user who you're selling it to. I used to work in the summers for a developer doing the real estate, you know, look at these gorgeous big windows, and having to sell flats and all the rest of it. And I was walking through houses talking about the design. You know, for me, I struggle. I think I probably sometimes have a bit of issue where it stops and starts. So, you know, definitely, I think design it's problem solving. You know, architecture is problem solving. And so that naturally does feed into all different, you know, strains of the development.
Great. We have a question from one of our fellow young trustees, Jake, who unfortunately doesn't have a microphone. And I don't think I'm going to be able to ask the question like Jake would ask it, because I know he would make it really exciting, but I'll do my best. So just background, I think Jake has quite a lot of interest in community land trusts and in, you know, kind of community-led development. So I kind of think this is maybe where he's coming from with this, but his question is, in what way do you want to disrupt the landscape of development that you're in? And where do you see the opportunity to do this?
So maybe Avital will be an interesting one for kind of from your end to pick up on.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, sure. It's in what way do you want to disrupt the landscape of development that you are in, and where do you see the opportunity to do this?
In what way do you want to disrupt the environment? Sorry, the phone was ringing.
It's okay. The question is, in what way do you want to disrupt the landscape of development that you're in? But if anybody else has a clearer idea, please feel free to jump in.
I'm happy to go first, if Avital, if you want a minute. So for me, I am yeah, as I say, I've already got a name as a bit of a troublemaker and a disruptor, a positive one. But the big thing that I went in on was this mandate of design, because I was the first architect that my organisation had employed. They now have another. And design quality was just not anything anybody was thinking about. It was about numbers, units, if projects would, the target was to reach the numbers, reach on time, and cost. And I was like, who's looking and talking about, having beautifully designed social housing projects that people can't point to and say, oh, that's a social housing project because it looks so terrible. So for me, really pushing design has been a big thing. Also, procurement has been a big thing as well. The type of architects that are employed by organizations, really kind of, again, design-led architects, rather than just big architects that have the name and not, oh gosh, I don't want to say anything too offensive here, because there are all sorts of types of architects, but really pushing a change in design and quality of built projects as well. So I did a lot of contract administration as an architect, so really ensuring that buildings are realized in the quality that they're drawn in, but also when they're built. So that's the big thing that I've been doing to cause a lot of trouble and driving contractors, those on site mad, as well as my colleagues, because I just won't stop banging on about design quality.
I think that is a big disruptor, isn't it? So I think it's going into an organization that never talked about design and putting that at the forefront. And I think you're really disrupting the way that an organization like that thinks about design. And one person against, an army of lots of development managers and construction managers, and making that influential change from such a small, and that for me tells me like the power and of our background that we have in individuals making such influential changes in large organizations. Sorry to come back to yourself, Avital.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I think a lot of developers want an easy life, and they don't want to complicate the process by thinking about context and working with local communities and artists and makers. And I think it's important for architects to show developers the value of this, and that it can help convince planners and communities of the developments, and in turn it will create better places. And we have, as architects, we have the design skills to create quality spaces on a limited budget. So we're more likely to be able to consider innovative and creative solutions that developers might overlook.
I think that's really interesting, to be that maybe a bit more nimble as a developer. It allows you to spot these opportunities. And I think it kind of comes back to what Remy was saying about, the scraps of picking up, finding areas, I guess, that traditional developers or kind of larger scale developers just might not initially go for. That's really interesting. We have some questions from Kirsty. Kirsty, I can unmute you, and you can maybe, there's a couple of questions there, so maybe you could just ask one of them just for time. Okay.
Okay, thanks. I suppose my one question I'd like to ask is, to everyone, I guess, and it'd be what skills from your architectural backgrounds would you say have been helpful in your current role? The reason why I ask is I've been working for the last 4 or 5 years for quite a large practice in London. It's very commercial, it's all residential developers, and I'm looking to move to a client-side role for the reasons that you've discussed previously, like design quality, more creative control, etc. And I'm just wondering what skills that you guys have learned before making the switch to a client-side role, I suppose.
I guess I'll go. I guess I think having a real commercial awareness, if you're working in quite a commercially focused practice, that's probably really useful. I think anything, I don't know, I find everything technical that I learned as an architect has been really informative. So understanding both how buildings are built, but also the contract administration side of things. When you've got, that is so much of my day-to-day role. We have a project manager and an employer's agent that in theory manages the contracts, but still you need to know what they're talking about. And so having that real understanding of what a contract is and how it works. And then I also think in terms of planning, if you've got some really good planning experience on the architecture side, being able to demonstrate that is really important. And understanding from a planning case officer's point of view, why policy exists and why your scheme needs to be sort of weighed up against that. And I guess that kind of reflects back on, some of the things that others have picked up on this evening in terms of sometimes sites are really challenging and they're not development sites traditionally, and you've got to kind of build an argument about whatever it is, about a new way of living, or understanding how basically you can build an argument to say, yes, this is a site for development is really useful.
Remy, you can currently, go on. I was just going to say you can currently run both, so you could probably speak about how both are interchangeably, learning from each other.
No, definitely. It was more of an extension actually, in regards to the fact that as designers, it's about being problem solvers, on the development side, and being problem solvers and posing questions when it comes to creating the brief. So, the developer, and as much as we've been talking, the dark side and architectural side, it's, our end goal is the same goal, which is to have this final, beautiful design product which works and all the rest of it. And I think one of the best skills in regards to from both sides coming together is actually creating the brief. And as a designer, it's posing questions of like, why can't we do this? What team do we need? And all the rest of it. Client side, I personally believe is some of the the greatest skills in regards to when developing a brief. A developer may say, I want a single dwelling, I want 2 dwellings, and all the rest of it. But then maybe it might be, to unlock the site due to it maybe holding warehouses on it. It might be, maybe posing, if we integrate an artist studio, that allows us to maybe have an additional 2 dwellings, or it might be the fact that, we have to look at the site in a different way by digging, or, even maybe actually going and knocking on the neighbor and saying, can we buy your roof space to allow us to kind of manipulate the site and the light, or one thing or another. I think one of the best skills, and when we have quite a lot of interesting discussions in the studio, it's actually building the brief and questioning the brief, I would say, is like a massive, skill, and understanding, what team you need to really kind of push the boundaries, and thinking outside of the box. And I know we all start off with that, going into design, when you look at such a range of different briefs, even in your part 1, I really love the, when we pose those kind of brief questions, even from part 1, part 2, part 3, architect in the office, it's really about challenging the brief and saying, why can't we do this? I would say is definitely got a massive value for, which we bring to our clients. And on the development side, I just feel has so much weight to it, because it is about unlocking sites. A lot of the beauty, unless you are Berkeley Homes and you can buy these ginormous sites, what is left in London usually has a series of complexities, and we need problem solvers. So we need people who are going to really pick at the brief and challenge what can be done. And I would just say that has a lot of weight to it, and thinking a bit outside the box.
Great. I think we're probably going to have to start wrapping up soon. I think we're getting onto our time, but thanks so much for all the questions. I think could we run around and do your kind of top tip from each of our panelists for, you know, architect going to the dark side, whatever you want to call it, sidestepping. What would your top tip be? We start with you, Guy.
I think my top tip would be, I mean, don't lose heart. I mean, a few years ago, before I started Brick by Brick, I applied to lots of developers, and I think there is a reality that on the face of it, they're like, I don't want an architect, and actually, there are lots of routes into development. I think everyone here has kind of quite interesting examples of how you get there, and so like, don't be afraid to sidestep. And also, I think local authorities are also a really interesting way in if that's kind of what you're interested in. So I think that's my top tip.
Okay, could we, Remy?
I think my top tip is obviously, like I already mentioned, about everybody really has the same goal, is that, you know, from a development point of view, the developer really needs to understand the value which the designer and the architect is bringing. And then from the architect's point of view, they really need to understand the risk that the developer is taking, you know, with the site, and they need to appreciate, you know, this long haul and the investment that they are making in this site. I think those are the two things: is, you know, developer needs to understand the value of what is being brought to the scheme by the architect, and then the architect really needs to understand the risk the developer is taking when investing into a site or a proposal.
Great. And Avital?
I mean, I echo what both Guy and Remy have said. I do think architects are sought after by developers because they rely on architects for their creative imagination to optimize the brief and maximize value. But I would say that if you're thinking of working for a developer, develop an understanding of the client developer's need for commercial viability. And then also don't be afraid to use your creativity and knowledge within the bounds of the brief, because it is welcomed and important.
Great. And Yemi?
Yep, so I agree with what the other speakers have said, and I think what I've also come to realize is that the development industry is broad enough for you to find your niche. It really can embrace the individuality of each person, and that ultimately means that you can work from a position of strength. You have to find where your interests lie, and it's very important not to be afraid of changing directions as many times as you need to get to where you will be most fulfilled. And there's so many roles that are suitable for architects. Do your research, understand where current priorities and requirements might be focusing on, and just be clear on the skills that you have to offer. Very practically, don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn that you see that are doing things that you are interested in doing. And I think you'll be surprised how many of those people will be happy to meet for a coffee, digital or physical. So there is, lots of people there willing to help. So reach out.
That's really great. I think there's so much overlap in you know, the things that we can do between architects and developers, and just, yeah, it sounds like it's just kind of one of those things. You've got to be brave and just kind of go for it, and use your creative skills and think of new ways to do things. It's really great. So I'm going to hand over to Deep to kind of wrap things up. And yeah, thanks to all our speakers.
Yeah, great. I think that I would take that as an open invitation from Yemi to slide into her LinkedIn DMs if anyone has any questions, and probably all our other epic speakers as well. So there was some other interesting questions left in the chat from Robert, and also Kirsty, you had a few more. So don't be disheartened. We're going to send them round to our speakers and collate responses and put them up on our Instagram along with the top tips, so they won't be missed out, particularly some interesting ones on social value and how you calculate it. So I just want to really thank our amazing panel tonight. I know we've only had a really short and succinct hour, and we didn't get to hear from all of your expertise as much as we'd like to. But I think the power of tonight was the introduction of ideas and the forming of connections. And I hope these sort of conversations will continue long after this room tonight. Next month, we will be hosting another one. So it's Life Outside, Not Quite Outside Architecture Series 5. And this will be on the subject of curation. And that will be probably in the height of summer. So there might be just one person in the audience, but we'll be recording it and it will be there for people to catch up on. Details of that talk will be out in due course, so don't miss from us. And that's all from us, really. So thank you, especially to all the speakers, Yemi, Guy, Remy, and Avital, and all of you for staying with us for the full hog. And I'm 6 minutes over, so take care and good night. Rosie, I don't know if you're there, but if you are, hit the music. If not, I can also hum. Oh, you are. What a genius. Genius. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.